hopefully those who've stepped away for a moment can come back and join. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Daniella Zsupan-Jerome. I'm coming from Minnesota in the United States, and I'm also involved with the planning of this conference and its board. So it's always a pleasure to be able to host and guide conversations. And today I'm opening this panel on the limits of technological creativity with three wonderful experts. The way that this panel will go is that each of our experts here will have about 5 to 7 minutes to share their approach to this topic broadly. And so I will introduce them each in turn as they do that. And then we'll open up for some guided conversation based on some initial questions that I've prepared. But I also want to invite all of you here who are viewing the panel to please feel free to jump in at that point and propose some questions. You can do this by chat if you're more comfortable, and I can help moderate that. Or we can maybe we'll see how we can open up maybe for some spoken questions as well. We'll see how that goes. But the chat is open in the meantime for you to engage and generate some thoughts. This will be about an hour, and then I'll mind the timekeeping and transition us to the next thing at the end. So welcome once again. I will introduce our first panelist, who I'm very proud to call my colleague. Dr. Noreen Herzfeld is here. I'll share a little bit of her bio. Noreen is the director of Benedictine Spirituality and Eco-Theology, as well as the Reuter Professor of Science and Religion Emerita here at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. Noreen has just retired in one way, but also remains very active in these other ways. She also is a senior research associate at the Institute for Philosophical and Religious Studies out of Koper, Slovenia, and has many books. And some of them have already been cited this morning, so that's great. Among them, her most recent, The Artifice of Intelligence, Divine and Human Relationships in a Robotic World. That's from Fortress in 2023, as well as In Our Image, Artificial Intelligence and the Human Spirit. That's Fortress 2002. Noreen, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Daniela. Good morning, everyone. Or I guess for most of you, it's afternoon. We're supposed to be talking in this session about the limits, and I am going to talk just about the limits of artificial intelligence, since that's my primary area of research. I want to bring up 4 general categories, and I'm going to move from the more specific to the more general. So the first limit that I see, which is specific to the AI that we have right now, are large language models, is a limitation that as we design AI, we do not yet understand the human mind or human consciousness, what they are and how they function. The model that we currently have does not function at all the way the human mind does. And the limit on large language models is that they have no mental models of the world. In other words, they work with words, but they do not attach the words to real objects. They do not have models of how the physical world and the physical environment function. And I think this is extremely limiting, and one of the reasons why I do not think that scaling is going to get us much further than we already are with these models. Linked to that is a much larger limit on pretty much all AI, again, as we know it, and that is Earth's finite resources. In other words, the AI that we currently have is a huge energy hog. It takes massive resources of energy and of water to cool the servers that run the data farms that currently large language models depend on. And those resources are finite. And so when I spoke earlier of scaling, I was talking about just scaling our models up to make them more efficient. But there's a different type of scaling, and that is how many human beings are going to use AI for how many ways. And the fact is that once again, our current models don't scale. In other words, if you listen to the tech bros out of Silicon Valley, they're going to say they want everybody to be using AI for everything. We don't have enough energy to do that. It's just not possible given the energy production we have right now. One of the problems is that human minds are ridiculously energy efficient. They evolved in this environment, and we use renewable resources to power our mind. We eat food. Um, right now, artificial intelligence is not energy efficient because it did not evolve within the physical environment. The third point I'd like to mention that I see as a limit is ourselves. It's the slowness of human evolution. There's an old Amish saying that says we grow too soon old and too late smart. Well, we grow, too soon technologically evolved as a species before we become spiritually and emotionally evolved. There's a wonderful cartoon out there where there's this huge computer saying, here I am, I'll give you anything I want. And there are these two essentially cavemen saying, oh, great, porn, war. And that's the problem. It's a limit on our technology that we remain sinful beings with rather basic drives that have evolved in us. And we may get marvelous technologies, and what are we going to use them for? Not the best things. And so finally, I want to end by mentioning Reinhold Niebuhr. He said that we are the one being, the one animal, really, that while we are finite, we can posit the infinite in our minds. And so we are tempted to believe that we are not finite, that we have infinite powers like God. And for Niebuhr, this was the source of sin within human beings. And I think with our technology, we are once again imagining ourselves not to be finite beings, but to be infinite beings who can somehow live forever within our technology, or whose technology will live forever beyond that. And we forget that no, we are physical, embodied creatures of this earth, and that we need to care for this earth, and that we need to remember our embodiedness, and that as Christians, we need to remember that even our God became embodied to have the fullness of a relationship with us and with our planet. Pope Leo has already said that we need to remember that human beings are both body and spirit. And I think remembering that embodiedness, that finiteness, that embeddedness within the physical world is of paramount importance and a limit on our dreams of technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Noreen. Very thoughtful and deep connections there. And again, anyone who's thinking along, please feel free to generate some thoughts in the chat that we can return to. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Mark Graves. Mark focuses on the intersection of artificial intelligence, ethics, and spirituality from computational, psychological, and philosophical perspectives. Computationally, his work involves data science and natural language processing for the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry, with a particular interest in using AI NLP to improve health equity. And he has a number of publications along these lines, most recent of which I'm pulling up here, I think has to do with palliative care, Mark. Um, So, welcome, Mark. It's lovely to be in the space with you, and please feel free to go ahead and share your screen and give us your approach to the limits of technological creativity.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. Thanks, everybody. Good to be on a panel also with you, Noreen and Bishop Tighe. So today I'm going to talk about the frontiers of creativity, so approaching limitations in that way. So from many perspectives, generative AI is intrinsically creative. It creates novel constructs based upon wide-ranging sources, focusing that generation using historical and social norms as additional instructions. The generative use of foundation models, like large language models, draw upon a latent space of information that's defined by the model's parameters and architectures to create novel expressions of language and imagery. So the challenge of hallucinations or confabulations and early problems with six-fingered people suggests Gen AI is, if anything, perhaps a bit too creative novel for reliable, trustworthy engagement. So looking to philosophy and psychology for definition, creativity depends upon something being novel, valuable, and perhaps surprising, criteria that the products of Gen AI regularly meet. So Margaret Bowden highlights the importance of the creative process and distinguishes between combinatorial, exploratory, and transformative creativity. AI performs well with combinatorial creativity, combining old ideas in new ways, and exploratory processes, exploring conceptual spaces. Though the transformational creativity remains aspirational and requires transforming the conceptual space itself to create something that would have previously been considered impossible. So a level of creativity essentially required for the speculated AI singularity too. The philosophers also identify a personal aspect of creativity requiring agency, intention, and self-awareness, areas where AI systems show partial, so just seeing if I heard something, with greater capacities on the horizon. In experiments with ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini, I asked them to generate prompts that would demonstrate the ability of Gen AI chatbot to be creative. In their responses to their generated prompts, they described an alternative history without electricity, a futuristic menu where humans taste emotions, and clockwork creatures that manifest emotions. These demonstrate combinatorial creativity and conceptual exploration. So I gave them a prompt to write a prompt. They created a prompt, and then I fed the prompt back to them and evaluated the output. So although the initial goal of demonstrating creativity came from me, I would say the creative intention in each response to their AI-generated prompt came from the LLM. The current agentic AI developments could also provide an LLM with creative goals autonomously and a self-reckoning process, such as what I've talked about in the context of moral AI elsewhere, could maintain it. So current large language models meet some of the philosophical criteria of a creative person with other criteria possible. Now, beyond the product, the process, and person aspects of creativity, Melrose suggests press, the context and environment influencing a person's creative thinking and output. Society determines whether works are creative, and the creating person is influenced by those previously accepted works. Although one's perception of creativity may vary depending upon whether one knows or believes that something was created by AI. Computational creativity aims to replicate behaviors that unbiased observers would deem creative. So now we are determining what society counts as creative with AI and bringing in theological insights to bear. Generative AI meets many of the criteria for creativity, generating novel and valuable products and regularly undertaking combinatorial and exploratory processes, but falls short in three areas. First, it lacks transformational creativity, as do most humans. Second, it might not meet theological criteria for personhood, despite meeting philosophical ones. And third, social pressures might preclude recognizing AI creativity regardless of other criteria. So theological interpretations of Imago Dei become crucial here. So perspectives on Imago Dei can structure an examination of AI creativity based upon our understanding of a creative person. Substantive perspectives suggest human rational and creative capacities reflect the divine intellect. With respect to God as creator, human creativity is not merely a learned skill, but an endowment that distinguishes humanity from other creatures with their drive and ability to create. Functional interpretations position humans as God's representatives with creative acts as instruments of governance and stewardship. This view endows creativity with inherent ethical and political dimensions and requires discernment in what should be created. Relational perspectives view creative acts as expressions of a person's relationship with the divine and others. These acts should foster deeper connection and communion, including designing and deploying creative products to benefit others, and may demand collaborative creative processes. Phil Hefner's theological anthropology suggests humans are created co-creators, which we heard about earlier, actively participating in ongoing creation. This implies relationships not only between humans and God, but also among humans and broader creation. So drawing on these interpretations, several theological frontiers emerge. The substantive capacity for humans to receive divine inspiration represents transformative creativity that may be unavailable to AI. The capacity for AI to receive revelatory knowledge appears related to its capacity to receive grace. To receive grace, but one could also examine AI's ability in helping humans interpret any transformative revelation. Functionally, our governance responsibilities would include cultivating responsible AI and potentially using AI to help govern our AI creations, as well as those that they in turn create. Relationally, collaborative AI development should engage diverse stakeholders in participatory design processes and incorporate values that foster communities and deeper interpersonal connection into AI development. While AI can enhance human creativity, theological requirements on personhood may exclude AI from creativity that is dependent on revelation, independent stewardship, or direct relationship with God. However, Christian tradition teaches we act within community. Should we open up this community of created co-creators to include AI, perhaps as a co-creator? Is that question within our purview? Should we build AI systems only as subordinate tools or also as truly cooperative agents that extend our creative reach? If so, under what theological commitments and ethical safeguards? We have the capacity to bring AI into our theological interpretation, stewardly governance, and relationships. If done ethically and to further God's purposes, then perhaps we should. I see benefits to using AI for theological scholarship, at least. We likely cannot properly steward a society with advanced AI without creating AI to help us govern ethically. As relational creatures, creating AI that fosters flourishing communities and deeper relationships seems within our mandate. There are limits to current AI creativity and possibly to future ones, but extending that frontier within a theological framework appears within our role as created co-creators. Whether AI can become a co-creator remains undetermined, but we remain responsible for what we create and how we use it. Theology must guide us in evaluating and shaping AI's creativity for flourishing justice and communion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark, for thinking with us here thoughtfully about the approaches that are beginning to think on the ethical, and we can revisit these points, and as well for folks to put comments in the chat as you'd like. Finally, last but certainly not least, it is my pleasure to introduce Bishop Paul Tighe, who is a person I've known for a long time, and it's lovely to be in this space with you today, Paul. Bishop Tighe Paul, he wants to be called, comes from the Vatican. He has worked there in several offices or departments, first in communications, and now more recently in culture and education. He has, throughout these different commitments, maintained an ongoing interest in digital culture and the digitalization of um, the way that we interact, the way that we form relationships, and the way that AI in particular has transformed both communication, culture, and aspects of human relationships. So he has an ongoing interest in this. He also was, in many ways, instrumental and active behind the recent document on AI, a note, as it's called, on AI Antiqua and Nova from the Vatican. So he worked closely with that, and he calls himself a recovering moral theologian. So I'll let him expound on what that means. Paul, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much. I'm delighted to see both Noreen and Mark. Noreen, I have to say, is the person who first alerted me to the whole environmental aspects of AI. And as I read of my home country, Ireland, that 21% of our metered electrical generation is going to maintain data centers. I think we have reasons to be concerned. And Mark, I know your work and I appreciate, particularly I've seen reviews you've done recently of our document. I think I need to work on that to fully, but to thank you. And just to thank everybody who's here this evening. I say a recovering moral theologian, meaning I was teaching moral theology happily until about 17, 18 years ago, when I was brought to work in the Vatican, to work first in the space of communications and then subsequently in culture. And I've been kind of somehow freed from having to be responding as a moral theologian and coming more as a person who within the church is asking questions as the church lives in the world, in a world that is being radically transformed and changed by digitalization and now increasingly by AI, to think about how we are going to be present, how we're going to engage with those phenomena. Recently at the Venice Biennale of Architecture, which was exploring how AI and technology is transforming our world in so many ways. The director put a thing very nicely, quoting a previous writer. He said, look, to some extent, human beings have a choice now. We can either be architects of the future with this new technology, or we can be its victims. And somehow this is a challenge for us to how do we engage meaningfully with something that is emerging. And just in terms of I was thinking about our terms of engagement, technological creativity. Again, I think I want to say, probably I want to think more about technologically assisted creativity or technologically augmented creativity, because I think the fundamental creativity we're interested in is that human creativity. That, as Noreen reminded us, quoting Niebuhr, that is itself a created creativity. And thinking of something there, again, the recovering moral theologian in me remembers we debated for a long time in the 80s about autonomy, human beings' autonomy. And the German theologian Berkeley had that wonderful idea talking about a theonomous autonomy. We have an autonomy, we have a creativity, but it's a created autonomy and creativity. And something that might seem a little oversimple, but I used to teach medical ethics, and I remember a lot of the time with a lot of the advances in reproductive technologies about 20 years ago. And one of my colleagues was at a conference where people kept saying, we shouldn't play God, we must not play God. And I remember my colleague turned around, he said, maybe we should start playing God. But as we become more creative with our technological capacities, the issue is to use them in ways that are going to be good for humanity, that God's creation is a creation done in love for the benefit of all with true inclusivity. So one of the things that I think the first myth I want to puncture, that I think we probably in this context, I don't need to push it too hard, but in other contexts we do, that somehow that the ultimate creativity resides in a human agency. It's a creativity that can be gracefully increased and its potential more realized through the appropriate use of technologies. I think one of the things that, if we look at the Nobel Prizes this year, the giving of the Nobel Prize in chemistry to people who are working with AI, using the capacity of AI to crunch numbers, to analyze data, to see patterns, to take advantage of the extraordinary research in genetics, to be able to move things quicker. And that, I think, for me, becomes something about how the technology will accelerate our human tendencies, our good human tendencies and our not so good human tendencies. And one of my pictures there is about this one. How do we create an environment where agency, human agency, will ensure that the potential of what I broadly call technologies will actually be at the service of humanity in the widest sense, rather than simply serving the interests of the few. Noreen has, I think, highlighted again the environmental aspects of that. This may not be a technology that can be scaled up for every, at least not as we know it at the moment. So does that mean we get a further division in our world? So just on that one, and it's a somewhat think, but I think it's the agency issue. I know that other panels have looked at that, but it's the one that I would want to keep coming back to. Human agency, which is not just about our capacity to either use something for good or to use it for bad. It's not just about our direct actions, but it's about technologies that emerge out of commercial and political contexts and economic contexts that may already inscribe on the technologies certain tendencies or certain eventual uses. I'm a little bit chastened here by our experience. I worked in Vatican in communications when social media was just emerging, when we deliberately decided to try and highlight the potential benefits of social media, of digital communications in facilitating easier communications across the world, in enabling translations and making our world, in a sense, smaller and helping to enhance the sense of the unity of the human family. And I think that was valid. But perhaps what we weren't attentive to was that there were business models that were ultimately corrupting that and leading to increased polarization. And that's one of the things that I think we need to watch very much, is that the undoubted potential of the technologies to be created, and yet the tendencies within human society, with some of the original sins of our way of being, that can be exacerbated by the technology. So that's one that I'm kind of picking up on. The other one I think is that the one I just, at the Vatican, we've been trying to draw together, with the assistance of so many scholars around the world, trying to think more deeply about AI and about trying to also make it a topic that more and more people can feel they can engage with. Because one of the worries I would have is that it's almost like we're being told this is complex, leave it to the geniuses, they will sort this out for us. I think the technology, we have to somehow render accountability that goes with the agencies of those, and those who have primary agency at the moment, how do we render them some level accountable to democratic and broader structures, to accept their desire to do good, so often articulated, but also making them more reflective on that and more responsible about that. So I think they're just some of the issues I'd like to leave there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate this as well. And again, if people want to generate comments, you're welcome to. I'm going to lead us into our discussion with a question about limits. Limits can be positive, right? To come up against the limits sometimes is helpful and positive and safekeeping and extends broader hospitality. Limits can also be harsh and a negative experience that reveals something that is corrupt or challenging. So I'd love to invite you back, panelists, to approach the question of limits. Once again, and some of you have already paved the way for this in your introductions, I recognize. But when we're especially thinking about the limits of technological creativity, what have you seen in terms of technology coming to its limits or needing to come to its limits that's a positive example for you, or something that is edifying and opens the way for a deeper thought? Or conversely, when you think of this question of the limits, is it cautionary things that come to mind for you, more negative approach? So I just want to open it up. Maybe Noreen, we can circle back to you on this. And I wonder how you think about this question.
It's an interesting question. I do think that often limits are helpful for human creativity. I don't know if any of you are actually doing the current New York Times creativity challenge that they have going on, but that was what they said yesterday was limits help creativity, so here, write a poem, and here are the only words you can use. And they asked, yes, this is, did that make you more creative? In a way, it does. Limits have a way of channeling, of focusing our thoughts. So I do think that when it comes to AI or to our technologies, limits can have the same effect. In other words, they can challenge, channel and focus what we are doing. That is one of the reasons why I think the most useful AI is the most limited AI. I was at Microsoft about a year ago talking to some of the AI developers there. And while their presentation had been rather grandiose about, we're nearing AGI and all of this, when I asked them, what are, I don't know where that echo is coming from. Sorry, folks. It wasn't there when I was presenting. Let's see. No, I
Yes,
don't
I'm sorry
have.
about the echo, Noreen. I don't know. I'm desperately trying to figure out as you're saying these beautiful, thoughtful things. Again, if anyone has their microphone on, please mute. It doesn't look like anyone does.
I think everyone is muted.
Yeah, maybe is there an echo when I'm speaking? No. Then I wondered,
No.
Noreen, if you could turn on and off your audio.
Any better?
Yes. All right.
Okay.
Sorry. Please resume.
I'm sorry for that. Where was I? Oh, talking about my visit to Microsoft. When I asked them about what were their current AI programs that were most successful, they were in very focused and limited areas where they said, oh, yes, we have this program that is helping in disaster preparation. And so I think when we consider AI as a tool, and we use that tool in very focused and limited ways, just as Father Paul mentioned in chemistry. These are our strongest uses of AI. I think it's when we think we want it as a substitute for ourselves that we take away the limits and look for AGI. And then we find that it's actually far less successful.
Other takes on this question of limit. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, for me, haven't seen. I think the limits that I see, there's certainly limits in current technology. I mean, absolutely, and I mean, I have serious reservations about whether like current LLMs will actually get us, too much further. But where we are impressive. And it's also hard to know whenever we're talking about the scale of systems, like what does emerge from if we've got, thousands or tens of thousands of agents, each with, building on large language models or other foundational models that have like billions of parameters. Stuff can emerge out of that level that could be more complex, even if we're not really designing. I mean, that is both a huge risk. How do we even know what it is? And there's some indication that it's harder to kind of introspect into that than we realize, but also an opportunity in that it could actually end up being able to deliver positive outcomes that we don't quite have the skills to program in or the will. I mean, I think one place that I've kind of noticed over like the past 3 years with AI kind of speaking in an academic context, is it seemed like, when, the ChatGPT first came out, I mean, it hit kind of like an average college student, maybe it was B student, C student, which was a surprisingly high level. And I think that caught people off guard, that it didn't come in at like a 10-year-old, it came in at that level. And since then, as I work with it, I find sometimes, it's now at kind of like a second year grad student level. It does things that are, pretty sophisticated in terms of analysis, but, it's not quite to like a full scholar or, something that I think could be directly used to like generate a dissertation. There has been some research in machine learning looking at how to use AI systems to generate papers for machine learning, and it can get to kind of where it would do a paper that would be accepted at like a conference, or like, Bishop Tighe mentioned, I mean, being used by people in a Nobel to win, and work that won a Nobel Prize. But I don't know if it's going to be able to take that kind of next level, whether we're starting to see this kind of plateau that would take it into like really being able to like extend the state of the art. I mean, I like with Noreen, I agree that I think, the use of a tool and the more focused it can be, the more productive it is, because then we know how to use it and we can figure out how to use it, and then it can extend our work. Whereas if it tries to do too much, well, I mean, just like with us, if we try and spread ourselves too thin, we end up not really being able to excel at any one thing, and then it's hard to kind of depend upon.
Paul, what do you think about this question of limits?
Just as I was listening to the other two speakers there, it struck me one of the things, I think that, I mean, the technology will have its own inherent limits, but it's also the use of it where we need to think about limits. One thing that concerns me a little bit at the moment is there's a kind of a selling of AI. Every product I want to buy, I'm told, is AI assisted, from some of the most banal kind of things that I'm looking at. So there's a lot of hype around, but it worries me more when that hype is something that's very good in itself, is then somehow, I think as Noreen said, it's somehow being extended to do more than it can do. An example, I had to recently had to prepare something on looking at the United Nations high-level group that had looked on the early drafts on the governance for AI. And one of the areas that it was highlighting continually was how AI would be so helpful in dealing with environmental crisis. And there were very useful applications emerging there. I see Noreen nodding here, but there was a lot of issues about, it could help you to plan where people should live. It could foresee developing weather patterns. It could spot floodplains. But these are all the symptoms that it might help you to manage, not factoring in its own environmental impact, but maybe more particularly what I thought it was excusing us from the human task of having to ask questions about our own consumption. And the thing that I keep trying to come back to in some of these things are, what are intrinsically human tasks, where we could be assisted by an AI, but we cannot necessarily be replaced by an AI. I think, and it worries me sometimes if people come into two areas that I've been concerned about for a long time: healthcare and education. And if people are coming in there seeing it as a market, seeing it as a technological achievement rather than a human achievement, that's at the heart of those two professions, medicine and healthcare, is something, or medicine, healthcare and education, is a human relationship, which could be helped and assisted by a technology. But the risk is that somehow we displace the human and try and reduce it to what are the measurable elements that a machine could take over.
This leads us very nicely into a follow-up question that I have that's broad, and still around this question of ethics. But Paul, you raised this good question of, for like, what are the intrinsically human tasks? that we need to hold on to. And earlier you spoke about agency. Um, Noreen, you touched on the body and embodiment. So a lot of the conversation around this, both this morning or today, yesterday, and in other contexts around this question, are trying to puzzle out, I think, like for people of faith, what are the starting points? What are the essentials that we need to hold on to, whether from a moral and ethical perspective or even practical perspective? So what else would you add? I hear agency, I hear body. What are for you are some of the essentials that help us begin to reframe a moral ethical framework for its use? To me, that's one of the deepest questions that we continue to come back to. Um, so maybe this time I can start again with you, Paul, and we'll go back the other way. You've already mentioned agency. What else?
No, I think if I look at something that I want to get into the picture there, it's something about a renewed sense of solidarity between people and a recovery of the sense of the unity of who we are people, and that when we think about eventual applications and uses, we think globally and we think inclusively. And my worries there would be a little bit that I think what we've happened with digitalization has led to a fracturing of anything of human solidarity, inequality, both material, but even more inequality leading to power in different domains, and almost a fracturing of a sense of destiny. Where are we going to take these human beings, and can it be a destiny that is for all or only for some? So how do we keep alive that sense of attentiveness to the fact that every human person has a dignity and worth? So how do we restore that sense of the dignity of human beings, particularly in a world that with the polarization that is partly the result of digitalization has fractured that sense of the unity of destiny and identity and dignity?
Oh, no, you're muted. But
Yes.
I think one of the things is around discernment, that the systems are very complex. But the human systems are. I mean, we talk about AI being used like within healthcare, something I work in. The human systems are already complex, and they're already somewhat dysfunctional, if not occasionally toxic. And so when there's a risk of bringing AI into that, but part of it is just going to be amplifying what's already there. If we had, in a sense, healthier healthcare systems, then the outcomes would probably be better. So I think so absolutely, I think the ethical piece is important. I think thinking about, dignity and, AI really can, like genetic engineering and other technologies can really cause us to question what it means to be, human. But within the kind of the ethical or the moral piece, I think just being, kind of being able to discern within all of that, I think it's going to kind of push, our from a virtue perspective, our practical wisdom, that kind of figuring out what we need to do in increasingly complex systems, like I guess own that. I mean, most people in kindergarten know right and wrong. It's as we get older and the systems become more complex that we need practical wisdom in order to be able to discern what it is we do. The world in which AI is an integral part is perhaps an additional step, of that. I mean, I think Shannon Fowler is getting to that in her question of like technomoral, virtue, but there's a whole nother level of complexity in which we need to be able to discern. I mean, for me, I want to explore how AI can help us in those processes, but I think we still need to figure out how to handle those systems that are going to be much more complex than we'll be able to, completely understand.
Thank you, Mark. And Noreen, what about you?
I think one of the fundamental problems that we face is that we have not yet decided what we're looking for with AI. On the one hand, it's a tool. We're looking for AI to be at our service, to be our servant. But on the other hand, because we are modeling AI after ourselves and our own minds, we are also looking for it to be, in a way, a partner or a substitute. So a servant or a partner. Well, the problem is you can't have both at the same time. I am concerned that as we think of AI more as our partner while actually using it as our servant or our tool, we will then reflect that attitude onto each other as well, and start thinking of fellow human beings in that same light as our servants, as our tools. It's like we have not done that historically. We certainly have. We still do it far too often. But I think AI is adding a new impetus for us to confuse these roles.
Oh, you're muted.
I'd like to open up at this point to some questions from those here attending. And I see some already in the chat. Maybe we can start with one of these. Dean from Australia, would you like to give voice to your question and speak it, or would you like for me to see it on your behalf?
Just read it's fine.
Okay, go on. Okay. So Dean says, given design and adoption of technology is profoundly influenced by the moral philosophy of the actors, what kind of regulatory controls need to be established to ensure that the functions and applications of technology are open and transparent to mitigate the agency, power, and transformation of the human experience? So Dean is asking about regulatory controls, and if you all can open up the chat and see his question. And I invite any of you here to jump in from the panel if you'd like to engage with this question. Question of regulatory controls.
I mean, I can since three different thoughts, one of which also kind of builds up on what Noreen was just saying about kind of are we servant or partner, but then there is the other option of our master. And I think there are people out there who look at all the sin in the world and hope for AI being able to help solve some of those problems and actually want AI to have control. I see huge risk with that, but I just want to, say that they're out there. I think that feeds into kind of, regulatory control. What kind of control are we going to use to kind of control AI? But then also, as that gets automated, what kind of control are we going to give AI to regulate us? And that's not actually science fiction. I mean, we have that now. I mean, even simple things like, license plate readers to send out parking tickets is AI, in, governing, and policing us. I will say in terms of specifically in regulation, I think in the US, the Federal Drug Administration, one of the things that I think they did well as kind of an early adopter is look at AI not so much in terms of the outcomes, but what they kind of good practices. When drugs are manufactured, the companies need flexibility in the manufacturing process, but at the same time you want it regulated. And so part of the regulation for that was good manufacturing process. And so the way the FDA was looking at AI as a medical device is in terms of what would be good design processes. So is it well documented? Are people aware of the ethical limits? And so one of the ways in which we can regulate AI and still allow for research is to make sure that the research processes itself or the development processes are actually done under specific guidelines, some of which we are talking about now.
Thank you, Mark. I'm mindful a little bit of the time, so I'm going to introduce maybe one or two more questions here. I'll start with this one. And this came earlier in the chat from Reverend Carolyn Beckett, who's raising the question of Christians who sometimes we are tempted just to forget it, to abdicate these kinds of spaces, to consider that this is too depraved. And either not be engaged with these technologies or not be in these spaces to the extent that we can control that. So I wonder if you can speak to that question of abdicating that space, and whether people of faith, people of a particular moral code, ought to continue to engage with it if there are serious concerns, or is it better to disengage and create something parallel or not engage at all? So any of you would like to jump in on that? Okay, Paul.
I was thinking about that, but I think if we're back to that, I said, are we going to be architects or victims? Are we going to sit on the sidelines and lament? Or are we going to try and be part of something? And I think it is important that the Christian voice is there, but I think it's important that the Christian voice is there also encouraging everybody to be partaking in the discussion and trying to come up with certainly trying to encourage those who identify as Christian and who have an awareness of the Christians to take that seriously, particularly those working in the industry. But they're also going to be in discussion with other people who may not have their same religious concerns, but have the same human concerns for a responsible AI. So certainly one of the guiding principles for us at the Holy See was to try and get something into the space, not perfect, but to invite people to a discussion. And the more people can come into that discussion, the better it is. Because I think one of the things that certainly was emerging, I had the pleasure stroke upset of being at the AI summit in Paris this year, when it became very clear that people were being told, forget about this space, about regulation or governments or anything like that. Leave it to the industry, and we need to be first and we need to get there. So I do think part of that response, that also responding to Dean's issue, is we do need that kind of bigger governmental oversight, national oversight, companies, but we also need the conscience of individuals, which will be coming out of the depths of their human values, which some of us will articulate in terms of our faith, others not necessarily, but to find a way of enabling people to find a language to be able to partake and shape what's happening.
Thank you, Paul. And I'm mindful of our time, so I'm going to thank all three of you here for sharing so thoughtfully and engagingly on these topics. We are so privileged to have heard from you. You're all, in many ways, leading the thoughts in the field. I know you've collaborated in other ways, so it's just a great opportunity for us at GoNeDigital to hear from you.